This is Lorenzo, and this is the Training Routines Taxonomy video series, lesson number 4. It's on the 3 different program elements. In this lesson, you are going to learn the 3 different types of routines, tracks, and complexes. You're also going to learn the 3 components of what makes an effective training plan, and not just a training plan, but just a plan in general: objective, strategy, tactics. And finally, we will introduce you to our 3-part MSP, or Mobility, Stability, Power-based exercise protocol. Let's get started. So for our first element, we have our different routine types, perhaps the most important facet of them all, simply because this taxonomy is all about routines. But we define an exercise routine in the following way. It's a dimension-specific, one of the body's 9 dimensions, integrative, mobility, stability, or power, track or complex, which I'll get to in a second, performed alone, so by itself, which will be a split body routine, taking about 30 minutes per routine. And when I say alone, I mean only one dimension at a time. So let's say it could be your anterior core chain, so just the abs, abdominals, or a vertical pull vector, working on your pull-up, for example, or a combination. So if I did maybe my core and a pull-up, that would be a total body routine. So that will be 2 or more dimensions. Now, when I say we have 2 primary routine types, I am referring to our tracks and complexes. So what are those? Well, our tracks are all of our gymnastics routines. And complexes will be our weightlifting or our metabolic conditioning routines. And the reason I've separated them this way is because of the way we measure and think about making progress within those routines. Now, before we get into the complicated definitions, let's just think about this logically. Imagine you wanted to make progress in your weightlifting. So let's say it was the back squat. How do you know you're making progress? Well, you know that if you're adding more and more load to the bar over time, that you're making progress, right? Exactly, but you're not changing your position. Okay, let's say with running. Same thing. Let's say you wanted to make improvements in your running. How do you do that? Well, if you had a time trial for 3 kilometer and your 3 kilometer time is coming down, you know you're making progress. And so the thing that's changing is just your time or your weights, not the position. But this is not true for tracks. The way that we measure progress in terms of our tracks or our gymnastics routines is not in terms of load or time, but mostly in terms of our body's position. Now, keep in mind what I just said, because it's going to help you make sense of the following definitions and examples. So we just said a complex routine is either going to be a metabolic conditioning routine or a weightlifting routine. The way that we measure progress in terms of our Metcon events will be in terms of time, and for weightlifting, it will be in terms of load, but within the same body position. Whereas with gymnastics, the way we measure progress will be a change in body positions, as you'll see in a second. So, for example, the way that we measure progress in terms of our cycling isn't time, but more specifically, let's say I'm doing my 20-minute FTP test. The time is fixed, so I'm trying to now cover as much distance or do as much work within that fixed time. So I'm actually measuring my progress in terms of kilometers. Another example would be running, where let's say I'm doing a 3,000 meter run or time trial. Here, the distance is fixed, but I'm trying to improve on my time, so I'm going to measure it in terms of seconds. For our weightlifting routines, the way I'm going to measure progress is going to be in terms of, well, firstly, range. Can I do a back squat according to the correct biomechanical standards? If so, then it's going to be in terms of kilograms. Am I going up in my weight? Or I'm going to do more reps on the same weight. Now, for those of us who aren't weightlifting inclined, another option would be the leg press, which will also be measured in terms of kilograms. Either we are going to stay on the same weight, let's say it's 100 kilograms. We're either going to do more repetitions than the previous session, or we're going to go up in weight for the same reps, or both. So with that as context, track routines can then be defined as gymnastics exercises whose progression depends on mastering different but progressively more difficult body positions, range or reps, along a linear multi-dimensional track. Now, for example, and you probably already know this, but let's say you wanted to make improvement in your push-up. That would be the horizontal pushing vector, right? First, you'd learn how to do the push-up. Then you would become more efficient and stronger within that movement pattern. And let's say you work your way up to 24 reps for the benchmark as a female or 48 as a male. Now, once you've hit that target, unlike your cycling, running, rowing, or your weightlifting, you have many more options to make progress within the horizontal pushing vector. For example, in the push-up, you can lean a bit more forward into what is known as the pseudo planche, and you'll go from 24 reps in your push-up down to like 10 reps in the pseudo planche position. Now, once you've mastered the dip, it doesn't stop there. You can now opt to take on an even greater challenge, like working on your vertical pressing vector strength by working on your handstands and handstand push-ups. And that is what we mean by multi-dimensional progress. So the push-ups in the horizontal vector, the dips also horizontal vector. So we call that intra-dimensional progress. You go from push-up to maybe even pseudo-planche push-up or dip. But then if you go to the vertical press vector, that is a interdimensional progressive track. And that is why we call it a track. It's like a train track that can stop off at different types of stations, and each subsequent station is actually a higher or more complicated progression for that particular dimension. For example, you could say, well, Lorenzo, I'm just happy with my 24 push-ups. I don't really care about dips or my handstand push-ups. And so you get off at the push-up station. But then time goes by and you get stronger and you're like, I'm a bit bored. So you get back on the train and you go and master your dip. And same thing, and maybe you get off and you come back on, you say, okay, I'm actually ready to start practicing my handstands and my handstand push-ups, so on and so forth. Now, in case you missed it or I didn't explain it properly, but it's important to make the distinction between inter and intra-dimensional progress. We can see here that complex routines are all about intra-dimensional improvements. Gymnastics is unique in that we can make both inter and intra-dimensional progress. An example of intra-dimensional progress where we are making improvements within the same movement pattern. For example, we have the anterior core chain. We can go from the L-sit tuck to a low L-sit to the actual L-sit and eventually L-sit on the rings. So here I'm changing leverage. Here, leverage still, as well as grip. And here I'm introducing instability as another way to make it harder. And then finally, I have the V-sit. Moving from a horizontal pulling vector to a vertical pulling vector would be an example of interdimensional progress, as we see here. So we start with the scap shrugs in a row position to the actual body row, where the benchmark here would be 30 reps. And this is amazing because this creates a very solid foundation for practicing the pull-up, which we can do using also assistance with the band. Moving to pull-ups on the rings. And then finally working towards a one-arm pull-up, practicing our rope climbs. All right, so that covers tracks and complexes, but you should also know that in total, we will be exploring 16 different routines. 10 of them are gymnastics tracks, 3 will be weightlifting complexes, and 3 metabolic conditioning complexes. For our second element, we have our training plan. You'll see that all of our routines will have the objective, strategy, and tactics framework. In fact, this is not just about training, but all plans in general. Think of objectives as the effects that we want. Strategy will always be the causes of those effects. And the tactics are the specific day-to-day actions that we take to get there. Specifically for us, our objective are the 30 benchmark goals already discussed. Our strategy will be the specific mobility, stability, and power requirements. And then finally, we have our tactics, which are the exact exercises and the equipment we need to successfully implement each routine. Last and definitely not least, the exercise protocol we're so excited to introduce to you is what is known as the MSP protocol, mobility, stability, and power. It is a 3-part mobility, stability, and power track or complex. Each routine consists of 5 exercises lasting 30 minutes. This concludes the introductory material you need to make sense of the 9 facets that we will finally put together within a matrix, exploring all 16 routines 10 gymnastics, 3 weightlifting, 3 metabolic conditioning to help you achieve one or more or all of the 30 fitness benchmarks.